Greetings and welcome to the 2025 commemoration of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. I'm Lori Schock, the Director of the Office of Investor Education and Advocacy at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by two distinguished panels to discuss a rising threat to older Americans, a phenomenon we're calling relationship investment scams. You may also know it by the term pig butchering. The tradition of marking World Elder Abuse Awareness Day goes back nearly 20 years, and the SEC has been proud to join with our sister agencies, public and private entities, nonprofits, academic researchers, and advocates for nearly a decade to help highlight the causes and contributors of elder abuse, including financial exploitation, and to chart a path forward to solutions. Today, we continue that important quest as it fits nicely within one of the SEC's three core missions, which is investor protection. At the SEC, we believe that an informed investor is more likely to build wealth and protect their nest egg and less likely to interact with a scammer. Education is power, and the SEC has a website that has tools and resources that can help empower investors to protect their investments. That's investor.gov. The SEC also protects investors in other ways, including our law enforcement function. Our enforcement division brings actions in federal court against violators of the federal securities laws, including the laws designed to protect investors from lying and deceit, designed to promote bogus investments. Today, we'll focus on several of those different ways that we look at relationship investment scams. In some ways, these scams are as old as the time that use puffery or Ponzi-like elements to direct investors to bogus investments, but their one unique quality is how they reach investors, frequently with friendly, seemingly accidental digital contacts like texts or social media DMs. Have you ever received a text like this? I know that I have. And if you were kind enough to reply to such a text, the scammers have a foothold. Our digital whoopsie opens up a lane for the bad guys to establish banter, possibly leading to online friendship, which can then lead to some level of trust that can grease the skids for the scammer to eventually introduce some type of phony investment. But remember, this is a long con, and these scammers are nothing if not patient. And even after they get victims to invest in the bogus scheme, the scam may not be over yet, as there may be future communications claiming to be recovery firms to help the investor get their money back. Let me play a 30-second video from the SEC's new public service campaign, and it's available at Public Service Campaign at investor.gov. Let's see the video.
Every day, thousands of messages like this are received. Most are ignored or deleted, but occasionally someone responds. To scammers, that's an opportunity. One that opens the door to a relationship investment scam, a long con where scammers try to form a personal or romantic connection to steal your money through phony investments. Don't open the door to scammers. Learn how to protect yourself at investor.gov/relationship scams. Before you invest, investor.gov.
You may have seen this video on social media, online, or even on TV. And we have more videos and educational resources on these scams available at investor.gov/relationship scams. Here's how the next hour is going to break down. The first panel will be on tactics scammers use and the impact on victims. And then the second panel will discuss action steps you can take to protect yourself or your loved ones. Before I introduce the first panel, let me make a general disclaimer. Our speakers today are expressing their own views, not necessarily the views of their employers, and neither the moderators nor the panelists are providing legal advice or investment advice today. With that out of the way, let me introduce our first panel moderator, our very own Tom Manganello from our Office of Investor Education and Advocacy. Tom helps to coordinate the investor education throughout the SEC headquarters and 10 regional offices. He's an attorney with over a decade of experience with the SEC's Division of Enforcement, where he brought cases against defendants accused of violating the federal securities laws, including insider trading, Ponzi and pyramid schemes, and accounting and broker fraud. Hey, Tom, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lori. We have a great panel today to discuss the tactics scammers use and the impact they have on investors. I am thrilled today to be joined by Jana Cadle, a supervisory special agent in the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber-Enabled Fraud and Money Laundering Unit. He has been an FBI agent for 10 years. We're also joined by Kathy Stokes. Kathy is the director of AARP's Fraud Watch Network, which seeks to educate older adults on the risks that fraud represents to their financial security. Kathy's team launched a national campaign to change how we talk about fraud victims and to transform how our country addresses fraud. Kathy's career has centered on financial security, both in the realm of public policy and the development of retirement education programming. And welcome to Brendan Purcell. Brendan is a managing director and enterprise fraud operations leader at TIAA, a provider of retirement and investment solutions. Brendan has worked in financial services fraud management for 25 years, and he currently leads the company's fraud detection and servicing operations, covering retirement plans, self-directed brokerage and IRA accounts, along with trust and private asset management relationships. Welcome to all of our panelists. Hey, let's start with Kathy. Kathy, how about some level setting? How do scams work in the first place?
You know, I'm really glad you asked that question, Tom, because so many people kind of see the scam victim and go like, oh my God, how could you have fallen for that? I would never fall for that. And you probably would, because the criminals have a playbook, and the playbook is based on how our brains have worked for 300,000 years. They try to get you into a heightened emotional state because they know in most cases, our brains will say, you've got to act now for this opportunity or for this risk, skipping logic, going right to action. It's something that the criminals have called getting targets under the ether. But academics have a name for it too, and it's called the amygdala hijack. Big term, but very simply put, our brains are doing what they're supposed to do, but instead of running from a saber-toothed tiger, now it's about a risk that somebody's presenting to you or an opportunity. That isn't true.
Thank you, Kathy. Jana, from your position with the FBI, why are relationship scams so successful?
Yeah, as Kathy mentioned, part of it is exploiting this human nature, but I'll mention two other things that we see in our line of work. The first of which is that these scam operations are increasingly complex. More and more, they're originating out of Southeast Asia. Many of these operations are run by criminal enterprises utilizing human trafficking victims. And we call them operations because, in fact, they are large operations with thousands of people. This consolidation of resources allows fraudsters to deploy more sophisticated techniques, which tend to make the fraud more believable. In the case of cryptocurrency investment fraud schemes, many times the fraudsters are using an app that's available in the App Store or a website. After the victim converts their money to cryptocurrency, they have a special code to log onto the website or to the app, and they can track the value of their cryptocurrency. All of that infrastructure takes software developers, business managers, accountants. So the level of sophistication is really increasing. The second factor that we see, and Lori mentioned this as well, is this transition that fraudsters are going to the long con. We used to see a lot of business email compromise types of frauds, and that whole fraud can be just a couple of hours. But now we have this explosion and these long cons that really unfold over months. And so that tends to add to this like veneer of legitimacy. Like I've had victims tell me that, I didn't think it was fake. Like they talk to me every day and just the amount of time that they talk to me. So those things, in addition to what Kathy had mentioned, like just exploiting human nature, this transition to increasingly complex fraud compounds and schemes, and then that transition to the long con really kind of drive the success of these types of investment scams.
Brendan, you're coming at this from the retirement industry perspective. What do you see as the contributing factors that make these scams so successful?
Yeah, I would just build off what Jana and Kathy referenced, right? So it's the sort of human nature of things, and then the criminal element and the level of organization and believability that they're now able to deliver. and then using technology to deliver these attacks at scale. So if you take, some of the examples that were provided earlier from Lori, but you think about the delinquent tolls that were out there, right? They don't have to be highly successful to be effective. They just need to grab one or two people and then start that process of sending that individual down the path of the long con, and dividing and conquering in terms of the operation. So the folks who are effective at mining information to figure out who's a good target, and then having a dedicated section to do sort of the customer interaction, the victim interactions, to make all of these things sound believable. The use of advanced technologies such as generative AI to craft the communications to make them more authentic seeming. And then we've got our own components just in terms of society, right? So factors like oversharing on social media platforms make the scammer's job easier to get to know their targets and tailor attacks specifically for them. And with respect to the retirement industry, we're an attractive target given the large amount of assets that are contained within a plan for an individual who's been spending their entire lifetime accumulating a nest egg, right? So if they're able to successfully infiltrate and get an individual to make withdrawals from those plans, those can be highly profitable for the criminals.
Kathy, it's important how we talk to scam victims, isn't it? What have you learned works best?
Well, we have to understand that, you heard it all here. This is organized crime. We have this tendency in our society that I think is beginning to shift, but our tendency is, so how did you fall for that? How much money did you give them? Why did you answer the phone? We did some research and found out that, yep, we say this at every level of society, but we don't mean to hurt people when we say it. We're just so used to saying it that way. So instead of saying, well, how much money did you give them? Which sounds very blamey, right? How much money did they steal from you? It needs to be approach the person as a crime victim with empathy, allow them to retain their dignity while you're talking with them, and understand that, we can change how we talk about it. And for consumers, AARP has a resource at aarp.org/say this, as in say this, not that, to help us all have the conversation with more respect to the victim.
I think that's very important, Kathy. I know with our loved ones, if we're critical in the way we approach it, they're going to be less likely to mention it if it happens again. So we want to keep those lines of communication open. Jana, can you talk to us about the FBI's Operation Level Up? What is it, and what can you say publicly about it?
Yeah, Operation Level Up is the FBI's initiative to identify victims as they're being victimized, make contact with them, and then convince them that this is a fraud. So traditionally, victims come to the FBI like when they realize, that they've been defrauded. So they're reporting it to us. They already know that they're a victim. And Operation Level Up really tries to interrupt that fraud cycle and stop them before they've lost everything. So through legal process, blockchain analysis, interviews, and referrals from our private sector partners, FBI tries to intervene early on in the process. And that's really critical because a lot of these schemes will start out small. So they're making the contact, they're building the trust, and then it's, hey, they're not asking, hey, liquidate your IRA and put it in this. No, it starts out small, and that's kind of what feeds into the trust. So they'll ask, put $1,000, invest $1,000, you'll see how it grows. And then over time, that's when you see the larger and larger investments. So some of the early investments are relatively small in context, and then the later ones are where they're really sending tens of thousands of dollars over in one transaction. So Operation Level Up tries to jump in there in the middle. They've already sent some money. We've identified them. We think that they're being conned. And then FBI is reaching out to say, hey, we think this is a fraud scheme. Stop what you're doing. Let's talk about it, which is just kind of, again, flipping how FBI's traditionally worked fraud cases, as opposed to the victim reporting to us. So it started in January of 2024. As part of this, we've notified over 6,000 victims. We estimate that we've saved about $367 million in losses. And that's a lot of like victims reporting us. We've called victims and they've said, I was on my way to the bank, or, I was just ready to buy, another investment. And 77% of these victims didn't know at the time that the FBI contacted them that this was a fraud. And most disturbing, we've referred over 60 victims to victim services for suicide intervention.
Wow, Jana, congratulations on those intervention successes. Brendan, what do you see as the benefits of education?
Yeah, so the TIA Institute commissioned a report in partnership with Dr. Marty DeLima of the University of Minnesota titled Safeguarding Retirement in the Age of Scams. This report is available to the public and it contains a wealth of information, but some of the studies that were referenced as part of this research found individuals who'd heard about a particular type of scam prior to being targeted by that scam were nearly half as likely to lose money as those who were unfamiliar. And that seems fairly intuitive, but I think it stresses how important it is to get the message out there, to communicate about these tactics and what are those key things to look out for. Some of the other messaging that was in the report talking about educational awareness was that messaging needs to be memorable. It needs to be action oriented. We need to be teaching folks how to react and respond when they get one of those strange phone calls, text messages, emails, et cetera. To Kathy's earlier point, it needs to use empowering language, no victim blaming, making sure that we're focusing on the positives of heeding these messages. And it also references the need that we have to keep this messaging fresh. The scam tactics continuously evolve, so we need to make sure that we're not just sort of set it and forget it with this messaging, but that we're continuing every few months to re-educate and to republish the types of things that can protect the individuals.
Shows how these types of conversations can be so impactful. Kathy, we don't want to victim blame, but when we suspect that our older relatives are involved in a scam, what's the best way we can talk to them to convince them that these relationships are fraudulent?
So I have two thoughts on that. The first is, let's not wait for somebody to be victimized to begin having conversations about the crisis of fraud in our country. We should be talking to each other as allies, not as mom, don't answer the phone. That doesn't help because mom doesn't understand really why you're telling her not to. You have to put it into context, right? Have a conversation. We really need a national dialogue. If I learned today that, Tom, you experienced something called the tech support scam, where you got this pop-up on your computer and it sort of freaked you out and you called a number and you end up, becoming a victim, that's information that's new to me. And I feel a responsibility to share it with the people that I know. Brendan said just a minute ago, you're like half as likely to not be a victim if you know about the specific scam. So we really need to be sharing what we know to everybody. I have a memory of someone I was talking to who was worried about her mom and dad. They lived several states away, and she was saying, don't answer the phone, don't do this, don't do that. And when I asked her what context she put it in, she didn't really understand what I meant. So you have to explain it. And then I told her about these watchdog alerts that she can sign up for, and you get them every other week from my team at AARP. And she signed herself up and she signed her father up. And when she receives that email every other Wednesday, she picks up the phone and she calls and talks to her dad and mom about the scam. And by the way, that probably helps a little bit with loneliness and isolation as well.
Power of networking, the power of information, and just sharing ideas. Jana, how big of an impact is this having on the victims and their families, these relationship scams?
Yeah, so there was a comedian who had a joke that went something like this. I was walking to the airport the other day and I saw an iPod vending machine. I get upset when a regular vending machine steals $2 of my dollars. If the iPod vending machine steals 200 of my dollars, I'm not going to get upset. I'm going to get my iPod. So this kind of tells us that with a $2 loss, we're upset. With a $200 loss, were seeking restitution. It is really hard to fathom the impact of a $200,000 or a $2 million loss. And these cryptocurrency investment scams, victims are liquidating their assets. You know, and who wouldn't? As far as they know, they've gotten in at the right time on an investment that's flourishing. We've had victims who've sold long-held stocks, liquidated IRAs, sold or mortgaged their home, taken out a loan, or even borrowed money from friends and family. So the financial impact is devastating. And many of these victims are at or near retirement age, not at the beginning of their career with many years to make up for it. But in addition to this, like, victims also suffer from humiliation, the inability to trust, and depression. So these victims have to grapple with the fact that they voluntarily handed over their assets, albeit under false pretenses. But no one stole their purse, no one robbed their home, and no one put a gun to their head. And that betrayal, that humiliation is only compounded by the fact that it was someone they were in love with. You know, so as Kathy mentioned, like, we really have to deal with these victims, you know, just with compassion. It is really hard to kind of fathom just the impact. It's devastating, personally, financially, and emotionally. Yeah, so thank you, Kathy, for bringing up all of those, you know, and just reminding us that, you know, it's not somebody who made a bad decision. This person is a victim.
Thank you, Jana. Brendan, in your role on the Spark Fraud Prevention Committee, can you speak to how this is impacting the retirement industry?
Sure. So the Spark Institute is an advocacy organization in the retirement space, bringing together, you know, various member firms and advocating for retirement policy. And as we've discussed, right, this is an epidemic, and the retirement industry is a very attractive target for the criminals. So Spark has been leading the way on topics such as data security, cybersecurity, and fraud prevention through the work of its committees, doing publications on best practices for record keepers, retirement plan sponsors, and advisors. And our committee brings together our member firms to discuss the relevant issues and try to brainstorm the best approaches to tackling this across our industry. So we're getting together on a regular basis. We're discussing what's working, what's not, what are the latest wrinkles, and how do we try to collectively solve this across retirement. And that's also in partnership across all other facets of this, right? So it's retirement firms, it's other broker dealers, it's banks where funds end up, and then ultimately into avenues like cryptocurrencies and other means by which funds end up in the hands of criminals. But it's trying to work collaboratively and collectively to try to help to solve these problems.
Well, I try to be an optimist. Is there any hope out there? Kathy, what are you seeing?
You know, I really think, Tom, that we're at an inflection point. I think that so many people either know somebody who have become have been a scam victim, or they themselves have. AARP's own research says that 40% of us have lost money or sensitive information to a scam. You know, 8 years ago or so, when I first started this space, I think we thought maybe around 15%. So that's bad news, good news. Bad news is there's so much more happening. But the good news is there's more awareness that it just isn't a problem for older people with cognitive decline. It happens to everybody. And we have two things that I think are really exciting in addition to that. One is there's an organization called the Aspen Institute who has brought together 80 different organizations, more than 80, from private and public sectors to begin to build a national fraud strategy, something we've never had before. So be looking out for that strategy to come in the fall sometime. The other thing is there's a new nonprofit, again, bringing the public and private sectors together, but in this case, it's to support law enforcement activity. It's called the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center. And the idea there is to overlay these crimes with that organized crime lens to be able to tie them together. It's something that law enforcement doesn't have the resources for. They don't have the funds. They have so many other things on their plate. This organization will tie the cases together make them beyond the threshold for what they need to be in terms of dollars, and then work with federal authorities to get it in the right hands of the investigators who will go out and they will investigate and they will arrest and they will prosecute and they will put the bad actors that are here aiding and abetting these criminals in jail, in prison, and they'll get real time. Begin to disrupt the fraud business model.
Well, thank you, Kathy. Some encouraging initiatives on the horizon. Let's close the panel with a quick hit lightning round from our panelists on some takeaways. Jana, anything you would like to encourage the audience to do?
Report, as Kathy mentioned, talk to your family, talk to your loved ones. Just make sure they know about these. And then again, sometimes we're in a position like you can't do something if you're a banker and your client is asking to withdraw the money. You can't keep them from their funds, but you can ask questions. So definitely asking questions, those probing questions. Do you know who you're dealing with? Those types of things.
Great advice. Brendan, what are a few steps that would be helpful to combat these scams?
So we've obviously discussed the importance of education. I think additionally, using what available safeguards are provided by the firms that you choose to do business with. This includes email providers, financial services, social media, internet and phone providers. Try to avoid reusing passwords across platforms. Use stronger authentication methods that are becoming more prevalent, like passkeys, which removes the use of passwords and user IDs. And then I would advocate for the use of trusted contacts on financial accounts, right? These are not powers of attorney. They're not individuals that have transactional capabilities, but rather they're folks that we can call on as financial institutions should there be a circumstance where maybe hearing it from us, you're hesitant, but you hear it from a trusted voice, and that might be what helps to get you through one of these scenarios.
Great advice. Kathy, you've made it clear today that knowledge is power. Any quick hits from you, and are there resources you'd like to share to help older Americans stay informed?
Yes, so AARP has a program called the Fraud Watch Network. I'd encourage everybody to go to aarp.org/fraudwatchnetwork. You can sign up for those scam alerts, the biweekly watchdog alerts that I talked about. It takes one scam every 2 weeks and breaks it down very easily to help you understand how it works and what to look for, and then reminder, share it with everybody that you know. And we also have a podcast that super popular. It's called The Perfect Scam. And the reason I think it's so popular is because it looks at fraud from the perspective of the victim and the people that are trying to fight against the crime. Super popular. Find it on any app where you listen to podcasts. The Perfect Scam.
Well, thank you so much to Kathy, to Jana, to Brendan for a very lively discussion on our first panel. Now let's turn it back to Lori Schock, who will be moderating panel 2. Lori, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And thank you, panelists. Now that we've heard about the scope and impact of this problem, let's go ahead and focus on the steps that we can take to protect ourselves and our loved ones from being taken advantage through these relationship investment scams. I'm going to invite my panelists up here, and as they get their cameras turned on and off, let me introduce them. For this panel, I'm joined by Michael Dawson with the United States Secret Service, who has led multiple complex investigations into transnational and domestic organized crime, cyber-enabled fraud, cryptocurrency, money laundering, and elder fraud, resulting in numerous prosecutions and seizures. Mike currently serves as an investigator in the Tyler, Texas office, and is the recipient of the 2019 and 2024 Homeland Security Secretary's Exceptional Service Gold Medal. I also welcome Jennifer Sperry, the Executive Director for National Adult Protective Services Association, also known as NAPSA. Jennifer has over 18 years of experience in adult protective services, including as the APS Director in Philadelphia, where she secured one of the first Victims of Crime Act grants designated for APS. And our third panelist is Donald Battle, one of my colleagues here at the SEC, who serves as Senior Advisor for the SEC's Crypto Task Force and as an Assistant Director of the Data Science Group in the agency's Cyber and Emerging Technologies Unit. Prior to this role, Don served as a Senior Virtual Currency Enforcement Officer for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. His areas of expertise include U.S. anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing laws and regulations, data science, and crypto assets and fintech. So Don, let's start with you, okay? I know you have extensive experience with crypto assets and fintech and cybersecurity. So what are some of the innovative ways that older people are being victimized by this technology?
Yes, it's unfortunate that it is innovative, and that as new emerging financial technologies come out and they increase in popularity, what we've seen in the past repeatedly is that these criminal groups adapt, and they start to use the technology as well in order to extract capital from the United States. And that's the same pattern that we're seeing here with crypto assets. And it's not just crypto assets in particular. Sometimes the scams will also include other forms of financial transfers, such as different types of payment. And so it can be a mix, but unfortunately, yes, crypto assets are being used in order to extract capital from the United States. So I've worked on these schemes over the last 10 years. And I can't say the primary way of tricking victims has remained the same. And I actually work using different types of data science, as well as like coding and analytics. So I'm sort of a huge nerd when it comes to these things, but that's allowed me to be in the data and see the different types of techniques that are used with these schemes.
You know, let's level set here a little bit. Cryptocurrency is something that, you know, everyone's heard of, but not everybody understands. Can you just share a little bit of how that plays into these relationship investment scams?
Yes, absolutely. And I believe we have some slides to show. There we go. So this was actually an investigation that we filed several months ago. And what we're looking at right now, it looks like a legitimate dashboard for people to deposit crypto assets in. However, it is pretty much a spoofed website. And the entire purpose of it is to provide a deposit address for U.S. victims to withdraw from legitimate crypto asset platforms into this illegitimate fake spoofed website. And unfortunately, once that deposit happens, the funds are then in possession of the criminal networks that are seeking to trick the people in the United States. It looks legitimate. Scrutinize websites like this that are trying to get you to withdraw from other platforms. And if we can go to the second slide. Earlier, we had talked about pretty much different techniques that these criminal networks may use to try to harvest or convince someone that the website that we just looked at was legitimate. Unfortunately, with the advent of large language models and new types of AI, these communications are becoming easier for the criminal networks. And the next slide, please. So this is a visual of legitimate US-based crypto asset platforms, victims on these platforms withdrawing to payment addresses that are provided by websites such as the one that we just saw in the first slide. Once the funds, and you can see the lines in step one, once the crypto asset is withdrawn from these platforms to the deposit address on the website, unfortunately, then the criminal network has possession of those funds, and they then go through a process of transferring it to pretty much a cash out point. So this is pretty much a general theme that we see with a pattern of these transfers as they exit the United States. It is incredibly important to take that withdrawal address, if unfortunately you are the victim in this, and provide it to law enforcement or the SEC, if appropriate, in order for nerds like myself at these organizations to trace these funds and find the ultimate destination.
That's great. A lot of detail there. So for folks who are interested in, they want to invest in legitimate cryptocurrency, any suggestions on how they protect themselves from these scammers? Like, how do I know this is a fake website or a fake app? It's at the App Store where I get all my other apps. Like, any suggestions there?
Yeah. Scrutinize attempts to convince you to withdraw funds from a legitimate platform. If someone is trying to place pressure on you, saying you have a limited window, do not do things impulsively. Take your time, do your research, and in many cases, the withdrawal address, it may not have like a history. It may have been newly created by them. So just be very careful when withdrawing funds from a legitimate platform. In many cases, they'll try to make you pay with legitimate crypto assets and then try to give you pretty much a spoofed crypto asset. That may not always be the case. I would say the focus is always scrutinize attempts to have you withdraw funds from a legitimate US-based platform.
Great. Okay, Mike, let's turn to you. When I think of the Secret Service, I don't always think of the job that you do as protecting everyday citizens. I think of presidential details and things like that. Can you share a little bit more about what your agency is doing to help protect people from these schemes?
No, absolutely, and thank you for having me. I agree with you. I think everyone believes the Secret Service and their protective mission with presidents and vice presidents, but we have been around since 1865, and our original mission was counterfeit and fraud schemes dating back from the very first day. But just like criminals and just like all law enforcement, FBI, local, state, and corporate partners, we all evolve with the criminal actions that are occurring. So, as we evolved, we moved from counterfeit to cyber and now into cryptocurrency investigations. And ultimately, we get the reports and also work hand in hand with all our partners to include some of our public partners with Adult Protective Services, and too long to list now, but we do investigate and attempt to seize and at a minimum disrupt any of the actions from transnational organized crime or any fraud scheme that's being affected.
So what are some of the trends you're seeing? I know you're based in Tyler, in Texas. So, not only in Texas, but across the United States, just relationship investment schemes or other types of scams that you're seeing?
And to echo the video that you showed in the very beginning, I think that's an excellent representation. Everyone is getting these text messages across the country and getting that outreach, that unsolicited outreach via text or email. And then there is some, there's a script that they kind of follow, and there's an enormous amount of pressure that's put against people, and there is a relationship build, but then there's a transition over, and that transition is to, hey, there is some sort of great investment possibility, and their sophistication is increased significantly, which also has increased the losses. And with that sophistication, they move into encrypted chats and other types of communications, which, again, to move money out of the victim's hands into their crypto wallets or to get it overseas as fast as possible.
You brought up a really good point there, the sophistication. I think that's something AI is certainly assisting with, and the speed that they're able to, set up new scams and things as well. It's not just the broken English or improper grammar or something that was a red flag and sort of fairly easy to spot in the past. And now it's like, no, this looks right. Everything's right except for, maybe the email address or wherever the solicitation came from. Money mules has come up as well in some of our discussions. Can you talk about what those are and how someone might be able to tell, hey, I'm getting into a money mule scam. In fact, I might be being used as a money mule?
No, of course. So what we're seeing on a typical basis is individuals who have already been victimized, and that the scammers cannot necessarily utilize them as making them as the source of the funds. So what they do is they try to transition these individuals into being money mules. And what that typically looks like is receiving funds from individuals you just don't know personally. They think they know them, they think they understand who they're actually speaking to, but they really are not speaking to those individuals, and they really don't know who they're dealing with. But more importantly, there's this push from the scammers to open up other bank accounts, open up corporations, open up bank accounts with those corporations, and ultimately crypto accounts to try to transition those fiat funds or U.S. currency into cryptocurrency that can then be moved along overseas.
And here's a question that we're all asked, I think, as law enforcement agencies. It's how hard is it to recover funds once they've left, they're left our wallets and they're in the wallets of the scamsters?
So what I tell folks is it is possible to seize those funds, but as time goes on, from the minute it leaves the wallet out, it becomes harder and harder, and the fraudsters and their methods, and they make it unnecessarily complex. And as time goes longer and longer, the complexity gets larger and larger, and the ability to seize those funds and get them back, and to write those, judicial documents to seize the funds becomes exceptionally hard.
Fair enough. Better not to fall into those hands to begin with. So that's what we're here for today.
I agree.
Jennifer, NAPSA is an association of adult protective services. Those workers are all around the United States, and they toil every day to help protect our loved ones, our parents, our grandparents, from abuse in all forms. Is APS the right place to, sort of report a suspected relationship investment scam? And how do people find APS and the resources in the community?
Those are very good questions, Lori. And first of all, thank you for inviting NAPSA and APS to be a part of this event, because we're kind of like the outlier here, but we are part of this multidisciplinary system that really tries to work on these cases. So APS is approximately half the time situated or housed in state units on aging. Local area agencies on aging in counties. The other 50% of the time, APS can be in community-based organizations or nonprofits. So we like to keep everyone guessing, right? But you can go to the NAPSA website, and on the top right corner, there is a tab that says Get Help. And there's a map there, and you can get help in your area and find out where APS is housed. But I would also like to point out that while we're here on World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, APS serves in most states 18 years and up. So there is also, interestingly enough, the FTC fraud info, which I love it. Nobody from the FTC, I don't think, is on this, but the ftc.gov/explore data is a very cool site to get data for your states. And it indicates that the oldest old are not the cohort with the greatest loss due to fraud these days. I mean, it's hitting everybody, and it's not just the old as we all typically thought. But as for reporting to APS is not always the right place to call, but often it is. So when you suspect that a vulnerable adult has been exploited, the best thing to do is really understand what APS does in your state. APS was started years ago, 50 years ago, and all, kind of grassroots. Each state built their own statute. And the territories are also included. So keep in mind that APS programs across the country and in the territories have very different statutes that may or may not include criteria regarding what cases are accepted and open for an investigation by APS. Some have just strictly age criteria. If you're over 60, over 65, it gets opened. Most have a vulnerability clause in there. So vulnerability in many statutes is if there's no indication that the adult is able to help themselves. And if there is no indication of that and the person can help themselves, APS may give a referral to somebody, to the person calling in or the older adult themselves or the adult themselves to, here's a civil legal service provider. You should call the police, call the FBI, call, somebody to take this and run with it, but they're able to follow that. So I hope that helps and answers your question. Where you APS, you've seen one program, you've seen one program.
Fair enough. Okay. If you're a caregiver, and you suspect that maybe an older adult is caught up in one of these things, in someone that they care for, or what should they do?
Well, I'd like to reiterate what Kathy said on the first panel about having conversations regarding relationship fraud before anything may happen. My poor parents are getting it every day. I'm just saying, I want that to really be on the forefront of their mind, but hopefully it will prevent anything from happen. But if it does, really just talk with the person. I think so many times we talk around people and talk about them, but just talk to the person. Don't blame them, as Kathy said. I do love the AARP initiative that's really been like, this is theft. This is stealing from people. This is not their fault. And so if you're a caregiver, let them know it's not their fault. Unfortunately, a lot of people, like those FTC reports are showing, have fallen prey to these criminals. Help them report the fraud if necessary, and if necessary, engage them in a support network or a counselor. Because like Jana said on the first panel, regarding the referrals to suicide intervention, there's been studies about the increased mortality rate associated with abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. A lot of people just think, oh, it's physical abuse, increased mortality rates. No, the emotional costs of this exploitation and fraud really takes a toll. And I saw it anecdotally when I was working in APS. People would pass away 6 months after a family member, or they were, defrauded of money and was stolen from them. So again, the emotional impact can really be devastating.
Thank you. And I can't iterate that enough, that there's more research in this area, and it just has devastating consequences just beyond the financial consequences of it. Don, what's our cyber and emerging technologies unit doing here at the SEC, and what work to help protect investors? And do you have an example perhaps that you can share?
Well, of course I can't talk about ongoing case. And in fact, I should point out I am on detail, so I'm not technically, working investigations right now related to enforcement matters. But the good news is, even though I'm on detail, C2 has an amazing group of analysts. I shouldn't call them nerds like I called myself. That would probably be insulting. But an amazing team of data scientists and analysts. And when these investment scams happen with crypto assets, they can use the public ledger nature of most of these transfers and trace out and find out where the funds are going, and perhaps who is conducting these funds. Of course, as Mike stressed, it is difficult to get the funds back in many situations. But if we can map out where the transfers are going, that may assist in that.
I think it's where those transfers are going, and even like the work that the FBI is doing to proactively call those who transferred to some of those wallets. I think that's fabulous. Our office handles the investor complaints and questions that come into the commission, and we receive phone calls daily about people who are in the middle of this fraud. And so it's just great to how people can help maybe protect themselves from it. Mike, let's talk about the resources that the Secret Service has, and to help protect older investors from being scammed. And what happens if someone's already been engaged with a scammer? How can you all help?
No, absolutely. So the Secret Service has cyber scams a resource page that you can get to on the internet on our website, and the slide will show you specifically. But also there's other areas that you can kind of move into. You can also email us at cryptofraud@secretservice.gov. But I think I need to echo what Jana said, where just report to ic3.gov. identitytheft.gov with the Federal Trade Commission or Consumer Sentinel, which is not represented here. But also, I think another resource we have is just the outreach and the education to local and state law enforcement, and the collaboration with corporate and our public partners everywhere to just intercede where necessary and attempt to disrupt and actually assist in the countermeasures to stop the contact and not let them get re-victimized.
And Mike, if you don't mind me adding here as well, what I just said about the address identifiers, that is also, if you aren't unfortunate enough to be a victim, to provide that when you file that IC3 report.
Absolutely, thank you.
Great. In the first panel, there was some talk about social isolation and loneliness. And Jennifer, how does that contribute to maybe an older investor's likelihood to engage with a scammer? And so, what can help in that area?
There has been a lot of research into this because the increased susceptibility to scams and increased trust when someone is socially isolated. Having little to no contact with family and friends really creates a perfect storm for these scammers. And it could be something like the phone, picking up the phone or email, text, but even just letting people into their homes. We've seen cases like that, letting them move in and then they have access to other information once they're in. But they just really, people want human interaction. If anything, the pandemic showed us that social isolation and loneliness is not good for us. Despite being an introvert, I still need people, So on the flip side of things, though, the scammers also really attempt to isolate the people they're trying to, steal from. So I'd like to also at this point just draw attention to a group called the Clowder Group. It's clowdergroup.com, and they did a film called All the Lonely People. And I'm not sure if anybody's heard of it here, but it's a fantastic film that they began pre-pandemic and then thought, well, we need to include a global pandemic in this film. And it really highlights the devastating impact of social isolation and loneliness. And they're now working on a docu-series called The Heroes of Adult Protection. And it's not all about APS. It's about all our multidisciplinary partners, including APS, that really work on addressing the abuse, neglect, exploitation. And it builds on the All the Lonely People film. And it tells real life stories of the various forms of, abuse, neglect, exploitation that vulnerable adults suffer every day. And it's really just an interesting hop from social isolation, loneliness. I think APS, we've seen that for years, that people, when they're alone, just they pick up the phone. They want to have talk to people. So really there's programs popping up all over the country. Senior centers are a good place to start out, and they're not all just bingo playing. They're really getting creative out there, but making friends, going to groups. So that's a great point.
Fabulous. Another movie to add to my watch list. Okay.
Right.
I look forward to taking a look at that. So, as we get ready to close the panel, let's go through our own lightning round here. If you don't mind, share one or two different steps that people can take to help protect themselves or their loved ones from relationship investment scams. Don, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. Not to repeat myself too much, but be sure to apply an extra level of scrutiny whenever you're pressured or requested to withdraw a crypto asset from your account. If the address provided, is not an address perhaps that you have created, and take a step back, especially if there's pressure being applied to you from an outside source, whether they're telling you that this is an incredible investment opportunity that will only last for a couple minutes, or they're perhaps pressuring you in other ways, that it is always best to think before withdrawing funds from an account.
Isn't that though part of this, what makes this so slick? Because they've developed this relationship with you. You're not handing your money over to them directly. You think you're investing it. And so that's really a hard, I know we've had a hard time sort of trying to work on that intervention and what message will help. And for those who've been involved in one of these, if you've already invested some, when in doubt, try to take some out just to see, because that may be the wake up point where they get out of the ether, is they realize, hold it, I can't take my money out, or they're requesting that I have to pay these fees in order to get my money out. And that doesn't make sense. I don't have to, pay money to get my own money. So that's great. Great points, Don. Mike,
Excellent.
all right. What are some takeaways that you learned and, that can help people protect themselves?
I think to echo what Don said, double, triple, quadruple verify everyone you think you're speaking to. More importantly, only go to reputable, banking and crypto companies. But also, if you do have a cooperative family member that you think is potentially could be a victim, maybe power of attorneys, or just really getting them out there and kind of keeping tabs on them the best way you know how, to include a good, strong cybersecurity knowledge on their part, up to including blocking, installing of software and things like that. So team viewers and things like that can't be included. But the list can go on. But it's really, I think, what everyone said here is keeping in contact with them and just kind of monitoring and maintaining what they're doing, just so they don't fall victim.
That's great. That's great. And talk about it. Wonderful. Jennifer, all right. You're going to wrap it up here. How about for older adults and their caregivers?
Great. I'm the closer here. So keep current. That's really the thing. In addition to what Kathy had mentioned about the AARP podcast and other media on fraud, NAPSA has a scam advice call once a month, just because the scams are popping up. I got one just this week that was about a state I don't even live in anymore, but keep socially engaged. That'll be my takeaway here. Get involved, and if at all possible, like I think it was Brendan on the first panel said, and both of my co-panelists said, have that trusted point of contact. It's hard for me to say as an APSer, because sometimes those trusted contacts are the ones that we see as the perpetrators, but we don't see all the good happening in the world. So having that trusted person that has view only, no access to moving funds around, is really important. So again, thanks for having me.
Well, great. And thank you all. And hey, I'm going to take a liberty here since I get to moderate. We've got a couple slides that if you want to take screenshots of, please do, of some additional resources that we have. All of these are on investor.gov, dealing with our relationship investment scam materials. Let's just ignore those messages from senders you don't know. That just goes so long way in helping protect folks. And then the next slide will show that, please stop and report those to the SEC. We will take those reports as well. And then finally, the last one is investor complaints or questions you can submit to us at the SEC. My team of attorneys and investor specialists, we handle about 30,000 questions and complaints on an annual basis. If you think you've been or suspect securities fraud, that goes directly to our Division of Enforcement at www.sec.gov/TCR. Or if you want someone to come and talk to your group or at an event, please invite our outreach team, and that's outreach@sec.gov. This brings our World Elder Abuse Awareness Day webinar to a close. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, for their insights into this growing problem and some of the steps that we can take to help protect ourselves. Please check out investor.gov for more information on relationship investment scams, or to reach our investor assistance team. So with that, I'd like to close and thank everybody for participating in today's event. Thank you.